Hello, everyone, and happy Friday. And this is the Parent Exchange here at Parent Support for Online Learning. And my name is Tillie Elvrum. I'm one of the administrators here on the page. And today I have, all our guests are special, but this guest is special because I feel like I have watched her grow up, and I really have watched her grow up. We met, this is Anna Ridenour, and she is an educator with Ohio Connections Academy. And we met probably 14 years ago when, and maybe longer than that, when she was a student with Ohio Connections Academy along with my son. And so we go back a long way, and I won't say how old I was then, but you were probably just starting high school, maybe?
Probably 13 or 14.
Yeah, you were young. And so, but we lived in the Cincinnati metro area, and I organized field trips for the school in that part of the state. And then we also connected because our families were very active in advocacy for online education in Ohio. We went through some pretty significant legislative battles in Ohio. And so Anna is just an amazing student. And her story is special because she was an online student who then transitioned to an online educator and came back to her alma mater, which is amazing. And so I really wanted to take some time to talk with you and go down memory lane a little bit, and then talk about just your journey and the work that you do now, and how your online education, influenced your online teaching. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about, what happened after high school, your college years, and how you ended up at Connections.
Yeah, so I actually started at OCA the first year that they were open in Ohio, which was when I was going into 5th grade. So this has obviously been a part of my life for a very long time. And after I graduated in 2011 from high school, and then I went to Mount St. Joseph University in Cincinnati, which is a small private school, and I luckily got a lot of scholarships, which made it possible for me to go there. And I studied math education, so my degree is technically in math, but I'm certified to be a adolescent young adult, which is 7 through 12 teacher. And then I came back as a teacher to OCA, which was always my goal because I love the school, and it's just a really good fit for me. It was a good fit for me as a student, and it's a good fit for me now as an employee. And I came back and I taught for 4 years, and this was actually my first year as the state testing coordinator for OCA. So as much as I love teaching, it was something that I wanted to try something new, because through teaching, and especially in this online setting, I found that I had other skills and just be interested in other parts of education. Although I do miss teaching, I love that a lot. So who knows, maybe I'll go back to it someday.
Well, I think that's incredible. You racked up a lot of scholarships because you were a really incredible student. And I know you won't brag about yourself, but yeah, you really were a standout student who worked really hard, and always impressed me. And you came from a family that put a high priority on education. Your brother was an outstanding student as well. So I think it's amazing that you went through that journey from 5th grade all the way to graduation, and really landed, we hear a lot about online students that they don't perform well, and they don't get a great education, and here you are as an example of everything that online can be for students, which I just really think is amazing. Did you always want to be a teacher, and did you always want to be an online teacher?
Well, first of all, thanks that you said a lot of nice things about me, so I appreciate that.
Well, you know I love
That's
you.
very nice of you. Feeling is mutual for sure. I'm so sorry. Can you remind me what the question was?
Yeah. Did you always want to be a teacher, and then did you always want to be an online teacher?
Yeah, so I actually didn't always want to be a teacher. When I was younger, like early grade school, I actually wanted to be a writer. That was my childhood dream. But then when I was in 8th grade, I had a teacher, Mindy Pyle, who I've talked about in like every interview because she is just the most wonderful person in the whole world. And she was my pre-algebra teacher. We may be joined by my cat, unfortunately, just so you're aware. And so Mindy Pyle was just an amazing teacher, and she really inspired me to want to do that myself and go on to be half as good of a teacher as she was to me, was always my goal. And I was lucky enough that when I came back, when I came back as a teacher,
Right?
exactly, just like all of our students when they have cats around. When I came back as a teacher, she actually moved into the Algebra 1 team, which was where I started. And so, there we go. I got to teach with her for 2 or 3 years on the same team, which was amazing because to come back to the school that I loved and to teach with the person that got me excited about math education and wanting to teach in the first place was just, the best thing in the entire world. I was so lucky to have that experience. And she continues to be amazing as a teacher, and just every day and still inspires me to just be a better educator and just a better human being in general. So
we had Mrs. Pyle all those years ago, and I can second that praise for her. She was phenomenal, and I just think it says a lot about the relationships that teachers are able to foster with students in the online setting, and to have that mentorship as a student, and then for you to get that professionally, I think is really special. Talk about why online was the right fit for you as a student. Where were you before 5th grade? Were you in a traditional public school setting, homeschooled? What did that look like for you?
So I actually attended a private school. It was a pretty small private grade school. And it was one of those K-8 schools where you pretty much go through the whole program with the same group of like 20 to 30 kids. And it was a great school, but for me personally, I'm the type of person that if I know that I can figure something out on my own, I'd rather just figure it out on my own and get that part out of the way and then go back and talk about it. Whereas the traditional lesson setup of my private school, which again was a great school, but the setup was, you're taught the information and then you work on the homework on your own. Whereas I just could, read through the information and figure it out and then get the homework done. And I didn't necessarily need to sit there for an hour to do that. And so I would get into situations where I was reading like my own books in school instead of, maybe not paying as much attention to the teacher as I should have. And so because of that, my parents just wanted to look into other options, and we found OCA. And at the beginning, it was obviously a very different program than what it is now. It was much more like traditional homeschooling, but you have the resource of the teachers and you have the resource of the books that are all provided to you, which is not something that you get with traditional homeschooling. And so it was more like homeschooling, but with resources. And then I talked about Mrs. Pyle in 8th grade. That was a really significant year because that was when we started having live lessons, which were where we would get regular direct instruction from the teachers. And the direct instruction is sometimes similar to what you would see in a traditional classroom, but it's a lot more discussion based and really a lot more aligned with what I experienced in college, as far as you're expected to do the work on your own and then you come to class to discuss, which I feel for me is the ideal setup. And so when live lessons started, I felt much closer to my school. And again, the combination of that plus having Mrs. Pyle really was what set me on the path to coming back as an educator.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest differences between what we've seen with the coronavirus crisis schooling situation. You know, we hear about students who maybe got 1 or 2 hours of direct instruction, and, you know, and like you said, connections and online education, we were really there at the beginning, and we've seen it evolve and change and improve. And, you know, for our students, every day they're, you know, in direct contact with their teachers and with their peers and getting instruction. It really is, it's been a little frustrating to see what's happened in education circles the last couple months, and people getting the impression that online learning isn't rich and robust and meaningful for students, because that's not the experience you had as a student or a teacher.
Well, and that is probably true for us, because these teachers had to make huge switch with no warning. Yeah. And they don't have the experience and they don't have the resources that our teachers have. And I've talked about, you know, Mrs. Pyle is obviously the pinnacle of, for me personally, of teachers. But the one thing that really has been a huge impact on me coming back to OCA is that all of these people that were great teachers to me are also great co-workers, and they are willing to help you out, and they have all of these years of experience. And so even if you're a new online teacher, you have so many people around you, not physically, obviously, because most of our teachers work from home, and we're all throughout the state of Ohio. But you have so many people that are always available to help you that have years and years and years of experience with this. And I see so many just, you know, students that don't have the equal access that that our students have, and teachers that don't have the access to resources like our teachers do. And we've personally been trying to reach out to colleges and other educational groups in Ohio to try to share some of our resources and best practices and things like that. But yeah, it is definitely challenging to see. And I wish that everybody had the resources and the programming and access to the experience that we do, for sure.
Did the quarantines and the pandemic, did that affect the operation of schools in Ohio at all? Did you guys feel any impacts from that? I've talked to several different educators and school leaders across the country, and you know, even within online schools, they kind of handled the situations differently. Some schools actually took a week to kind of reset, because all of a sudden they had, you know, teachers that had spouses home and their own children home, and they were juggling trying to educate their own children. So they, you know, they kind of did a little triaging before they could, you know, get back on track. But did you guys experience anything like that in Ohio?
We didn't take a break. We definitely, our school was open the whole time. We never closed or anything like that. Right after the governor released his statement saying that all schools had to close in Ohio. It was kind of difficult for us because the statement was all schools have to close. And that kind of puts us in a difficult position because although we can say, okay, this is clearly not the intention, like, because he's saying like schools can provide online education and all of this stuff. But he's saying all schools have to close, and we don't want to do anything that is going to be contrary to the governor, obviously. So there was definitely a couple of days after that where we were wondering if we were going to be required to close and trying to figure out what that would mean for us, you know, just to stay in compliance with the Ohio Department of Education and you know, all of that stuff. But then luckily the governor did release a statement saying that this does not apply to online schools. So we were able to continue and our students were able to finish out the school year. As the state testing coordinator, it certainly impacted my job pretty significantly because we were heading into spring testing, which is the biggest round of testing by far. Almost all of our students have take students through 10 or 11. Pretty much all of those students have to take tests in at least a couple of subjects. So, you know, we had to make some calculated decisions on whether or not we thought state testing was going to happen at all, because it was our state testing for our school was scheduled after the official first window of when schools were going to be closed. So we had to figure out, well, what's the likelihood that they're going to reopen after those 4 weeks? And because of us being all over the state of Ohio, we have all of these test sites throughout the entire state of Ohio, and we have to order, you know, Chromebooks and electronics to make sure that all of that is set up. So we had to do some calculating on figuring out how that was all going to work, and eventually it was all canceled, and you know, we were able to deal with that. But yeah, it was definitely disruptive, and we've definitely given a little bit more flexibility to our teachers in particular, who are at home with their kids a lot of the time. And also to our families, because you never know what's going on in a family's life if their parents have lost a job, or you know, if somebody gets sick. There's just a lot of things going on right now in everybody's lives, and so we've tried to be as flexible as possible with all of our families.
So if you know a student has kind of fallen off the radar, or, you know, lessons aren't getting completed in a timely fashion, what's the action plan when you see, you know, something's not right? What do you guys do to help engage that student?
So our goal is for that to not happen, because we have monthly homeroom check-in calls, and that's like the minimum contact that you would get with your homeroom teacher. Obviously for your other subjects, you have your live lessons, you can call them or webmail them at any time with a question, but every student is required to have a monthly homeroom check-in with their homeroom teacher. And so those monthly check-ins are a way that teachers can notice patterns before they become severe patterns. So if a student is caught up, especially around, you know, with this situation, if a student was caught up all the way through March and then started to be, you know, 20 lessons behind when the homeroom teacher calls them, they're going to ask what's going on. So those monthly homeroom check-ins is kind of a way to prevent anything too severe from happening. But if something happens in between those homeroom calls and a student does start to fall behind, or they're not submitting work, I would say if they have submitted minimal work for like within a week, we have a process for reviewing attendance weekly. Then that student will either get a webmail or a phone call from the teacher. If they don't respond to the webmail, then the teacher will call them and you know, keep trying to get a hold of them, just to figure out what's going on. And the attendance laws in Ohio are pretty strict. And so we always make sure that they're aware of the attendance rules as far as, you have to be attending regularly in order to stay enrolled at an online school. And then depending on how that conversation goes, depending on what is causing the students to fall behind, the teacher will say, okay, well, you're frustrated with this science lesson, so I'm going to have the science teacher reach out to you. Or, something happened where they got sick, and then they say, okay, we'll make sure that you get me the doctor's notes if you have one, and then we can make sure that the team is aware of it, and then once you get better, we can work together as a team and help you get caught up. So
there's
that's typically what happens.
A lot of different layers of accountability.
Yes.
for students and parents. And you talk about the laws in Ohio. Ohio's gotten a bad rap when it comes to online education. There were some, issues there. And I think what's important for people to know, though, is Ohio Connections Academy has always been very proactive on helping policy to do it right and to do it well, and to, hopefully craft policy that's not going to have a negative impact on the school that would stifle the innovation or really kind of fundamentally change the model, which I think is important. And the schools in Ohio they really work together to advocate and make sure that policymakers understand the work that you do as educators and as a school, and then the important role that parents and students play and how that's a partnership. So I'm glad to hear that, we keep students accountable, and the goal is to keep everybody on track and progressing. And there's checks in place to make that happen. You talked a little bit about the governor, and he did what many governors, they closed schools at the start of this pandemic, but he was responsive and knew he needed to come out and say, online schools, you're okay. We actually had schools in the country, states in the country, where they said no online, you can't do it. And what a bad decision that was. Did you feel like you got timely information from the Department of Education, from the state, to make those decisions about testing? Sometimes I hear things from people, especially in testing, where the online school is kind of the afterthought. Like, they keep forgetting that we have this population of kids out here that do full-time online education, and they're an afterthought when these kinds of things happen and decisions are making. Do you feel like you were getting timely information to make decisions?
I will see how I can word this to best reflect my thoughts. Yeah, that's the goal. I will say that what I've learned is that the whole system of who decides what in education is, first of all, a lot more complicated than I thought. Even with my experience of graduation laws changing and all of that stuff, it can be very tricky to figure out who is allowed to do what. And ODE has not necessarily been the most communicative about changes, but I can also see where there have been quite a few things that they've needed to wait on the legislature or the governor, and so they may not necessarily have the ability to tell us, testing is canceled, because that has to be passed as a law. We had to have a bill passed that canceled state testing for the school year. There were some issues that I had, especially I want to say it was like 2 days after no, it was 2 days after like schools were closed. I got an email from ODE as a state testing coordinator that said state testing will be from this date to this date. There will be no extensions, and that those dates overlapped with the 4-week window of school closures. So the governor had already said there will be no state testing during these weeks, and state testing may be canceled. And then ODE had sent out, and it was one of those pre-formed emails that they like had probably sent like 2 years ago, and it was just said to show up on that day in my inbox. And man, I really feel bad for whoever had to respond to the responses to that email, because I'm sure that was not a good day.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's so much that we don't think about.
Yeah.
The different levels of bureaucracy, which, you know, everybody's trying to do their job and do it well, but there are so many layers and so many people with different, you know, agendas and missions to complete. And sometimes that creates some confusion. So you talk about state testing. Do you coordinate any other testing within the school? Does Connections have their own testing that they do independently from the state that you guys use for your own metrics?
Yeah, we actually use MAP testing, NWEA MAP testing, which I think a lot of people have become familiar with, because a lot of parents of students that go to traditional schools are aware of it when I bring it up, talking about my job. So a lot of people are familiar with that. That is testing that we do. So that was another thing that kind of changed. We typically require all of our students from grades 3 through 10, actually K through 10, to do a pre-test, a mid-test, and a post-test, so that we can know how well that they're progressing, how much they are learning according to the MAP tests. And it also gives good predictions. Well, it gives predictions. I can't say how good or not they are, because who knows, when a kid is taking a test, it's just not the end all be all of how well they're going to score in another test. But they do give predictions that we find very useful for how well they're going to do on the state tests. And because there was just so much going on with our teachers and our families, we did decide not to give the post-test unless there was a specific reason for the student to take the test. And we did find that there were students that still wanted to take the test, that wanted to know how much they had learned across the school year, or they wanted to maybe skip a grade, but they wanted to have the test results to back up that that decision. So we did have some students that still elected to take the post-test, but that was definitely a much smaller testing session than we would normally have.
Well, I think that's good for people to hear, is that, you know, we're not just testing to meet state mandates, but also doing it to really understand how students are being served and what their needs are. Do you guys, once you get those results, does that change how the student's educated, or, you know, do they get some special attention if it looks like they need, you know, some concentration in a certain subject?
Yeah, so this is our second year. We just implemented MAP for the first time last year. And so the first year was basically just us figuring out how to give the test in an online environment, and then using the results wherever. It was kind of up to the teacher how they wanted to use the results. And so this being our second year, we really wanted to explore how those test results could be used to benefit our students. And it varies depending on you know, the grade band and the teacher and all of that stuff. But the results are definitely analyzed on a school level, and that's part of my job, is analyzing it on a school level of how much are these students progressing. And then data, one piece of data can only give you so much information. So we like to look at it in terms of, this is how much a student grew over the school year, and then this is also what their grade was in the course, or how many live lessons they attended. And so we like to look at a lot of different pieces of data to try to figure out patterns between all those different sets of data. But as far as like, if an individual student takes a test and let's say they don't do well on it, then the teacher will have a conference after every time they take the test. So they take the pretest, and then they have a pretest conference. For English and math are typically the two that are given to almost all students. And the teacher will say, you know, these were your strengths and these are some areas to improve on. Here are some strategies of how you can improve on those. And we have had some teachers that will set it up so that they have like, I don't want to get too technical. I know you know what a breakout room and a live lesson is, but they'll have small group instruction.
What is Anna? What is that?
So within, we're on Zoom right now, but we were actually just talking before this meeting about how we typically use live lesson, which is in Adobe Connect. And the program itself has a lot of really neat features where you can divide groups of people into what are called breakout rooms. And so you can take 5 kids that want to work on this one thing and put them in a breakout room. And if they are motivated to participate, they can sometimes even just work on their own. I've done that before, where I have several groups of students, and then I just move throughout all the rooms and I get them started, and they work on an activity that is something that they need some help in or need some extra practice in, and then if they get stuck, then I'll go into that room, and then once they get going, if they're having a good discussion, even if they're not getting to the answer right away, I just let them work it out themselves and talk to each other and try to come to a conclusion, and then just go between all the rooms. And that's one way that we've used those results. And yeah, so that there's sort of endless ways, but that those are some main ways that we have used those.
Yeah, people don't understand that many of these online schools have, proprietary software, or, they have actual classroom settings that aren't Zoom, that can't get Zoom bombed. They're secure and safe. Nobody else can join in from the outside world. Only your class and your peers can join in. What are some other functions in live lessons that you guys use? One of my favorite was, we always hear about, there's always one kid in class that's the class clown or attention seeking, and we love those kids. But, just like in if a kid's going to act up, they will act up either in real time or online. And it was always fun to see the teacher just be able to mute that particular student. And so
yeah.
What are some of the other features that, you as a teacher, the tools that you have to manage the class and to make it fun and exciting and to engage with students? Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so definitely the ability to give and take away microphone rights. I know when I was student teaching in a traditional classroom, I would have loved to take away microphone rights from some of my students in person, but that is not an option. And so that is definitely something that is beneficial, because as much as you want every student to feel like their voice is being heard, it can't be at the detriment of other students. And typically that's not a problem. And every single time I've seen it happen, once you address it once in live lesson, it never happens again. So I've had, on the rare occasion, I think maybe twice in my 4 years of teaching, I had to just kick a student out of the live lesson room if they were, just typing anything inappropriate in the chat. The first time it happens, I kick them out. Even even if it is just something that was rude to another student, I had very low tolerance for that because it just has no place in the classroom. And every single time I would remove them from the live lesson, I would continue the lesson for all the other students, and I would call the student afterwards, talk to their parents if their parents were available, and it never happened again. But as far as the fun parts of live lesson, I talked about the breakout rooms, little tools that you can use, like there's a randomizer, so you can click a button and it'll pick a random person in the live lesson room. And so you can, I like to do that when I was doing like review games. Like I would do Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, and then I would do the randomizer, and then whoever was randomly selected would get to pick like the category and a point value. So that's a way to incorporate maybe the students that wouldn't necessarily be, you know, the Hermione Grangers of the world, like I was, sitting with my hand in the air, bouncing up and down, to sort of incorporate more of those students.
I loved that.
Yeah.
You know,
And
there are so many students who don't necessarily, like you said, they're not going to be the one to raise their hand in a traditional setting, but they're able to communicate with you one-on-one in a live lesson where nobody else can know. Like you can ask a question and all the kids can type in their answer, and that allows you to see, like, you know, okay, I have these 5 students that they didn't get it, so I know I need to circle back with them later. And there's none of that embarrassment that they got the question wrong, or, you know, nobody else has to know. I think that's one of the really freeing things for students.
yeah, and actually to go off of that, I used to use, it's called a Q&A pod. And the idea is that you send in a question and nobody else can see your question unless the teacher publishes it. And I always used it in reverse, because as a math teacher, you can ask a question like, you know, solve for X, you know, we've tried a couple of problems on it like together, now try this one on your own. And if you just have a chat pod and everyone is saying X is equal to 7, you don't know if they actually worked it out on their own or if they're just copying the person above them. So I would take the chat away, or just say, you know, make sure to put your answer in the Q&A pod, and they would submit their answers to me that way instead of their questions. And then I would select one that got it correct, and then I would share that with the whole group. So you had a student who there was no danger of being incorrect and being called out, but there was the benefit of, if you submitted the answer correctly, then you could have it shown to the whole class. Then you get to feel good about, like, I was the first person to get the answer correct, which was something that was motivating for me in high school. Hopefully it was motivating for my students, but they seem to enjoy that a lot.
Yeah, Lori Cooney is watching on Facebook, and she said the feedback is so important and individualized. And I think that's one of the things, as a parent, I appreciated, was that level of personalization, and that each student could get that, even in real time in a class. What happens if a kid can't make a live lesson? How do you guys deal with that? Because you still want them, you know, learning the material and benefiting from the instruction. How do you guys overcome that if there's a doctor's appointment or something happens and a kid can't make their live lesson?
Yeah, so all of our live lessons are recorded, and that has always been true from the very beginning. We've always had recorded live lessons, so you can access them at any time later on. And our teachers have actually done a lot of really cool work in the past few years as far as making their own like quick overview videos. Some teachers have used like their own YouTube channels, and just other programs that they can, you know, compile quick little videos, because a lot of the benefit of the live lesson is to have that discussion. And so it's always good to review those, but if it's 45 minutes of discussion and as a teacher, a lot of that is asking a question and then giving students time to think and then respond. Sometimes the video resources are a great alternative to that as well. So you do have the benefit of the recorded live lesson, but a lot of our teachers are also making shorter videos either through pre-recorded live lessons or other programs to help give an overview of the lessons, and that's been a really great resource too.
That's awesome. That's awesome. How did your experiences as a student, how did that influence your teaching? Did it?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I had a huge head start on every other teacher that becomes an online teacher, because I feel like everybody else talks about what a learning curve it was for them, because it's not a typical experience for students. Most people do not have the experience of going to an online school. And the fact that I had all of that experience as a student just made me much more familiar with what the programs were like, how to work with the technology side of things. But it also definitely influenced me in more not as concrete ways, because I was used to working independently. I was used to really being accountable to myself on a day-to-day basis, because even though there are things like deadlines and other teachers that were holding me accountable and everything, it was still a lot of independent work. And so that taught me about responsibility and my experience with my teachers. Once again, talking about Mrs. Pyle, that was a huge impact on me, because not only did I have the experience of working with the technical side of things and the work ethic that I needed, I also had great role models as far as when you're working with a student, how do you make sure that you are listening more than you're talking, and that you are making sure that they feel like their voice is being heard, and that you are giving them the resources that they need and the help that they need to succeed. So I would say, there's so many ways that it has impacted me, but those are a few of them.
That's awesome. Now, how was the transition from 4 years of teaching to the admin side? Like, was it you were just ready for that change? Do you miss the teaching aspect? Talk about that transition, because I think that's a natural transition for a lot of teachers as they eventually go on and get higher degrees and move into admin. So what's that experience like in the online setting?
Yeah, I will say not a transition that I saw myself making when I became a teacher. I definitely, from the time that I was 13 until, a couple of years into teaching, I felt like teaching was my goal. And once I'm there, like, I have met the goal, and then I'm just going to keep going in that. And that was just always what I wanted to do. And I did enjoy it, and I do miss teaching. And in fact, I'm working with a stats student right now, and even though stats is not my specialty, I'm like, oh man, I do kind of miss this. It is kind of fun just seeing someone learn and being a part of that experience. But one of the parts of being a teacher at an online school is that there is so much data analysis that is done because we have so much data available. Just by the nature of being an online school, we have a lot of data that is always available to our teachers. And I slowly, over the course of 4 years of teaching, just got more and more into that. And it started out with, like, I've got my spreadsheet that tracks all my students that I'm calling for my homeroom calls. And then it was like, all right, now I've got a spreadsheet that links to their grade book and to their data view for signing up for spring testing, to, okay, I'm making spreadsheets for the entire school to organize all of the attendance for state testing. And, you know, it just kind of evolved from there as far as I built up my skills. And then the more skills I built up, the more I was like, okay, well, this is related to my job, but it's not really, you know, the same thing as teaching. And the more I built up those skills, the more I enjoyed that kind of work. And, you know, it was also kind of a point of like, well, I feel like I can do this. And I feel like you kind of talked about this earlier, where it's so frustrating to see somebody and be like, well, we can do that better. Like, it's frustrating to see schools that are struggling with, and it's through no fault of their own. It's hard to see kids that are not getting the education that they deserve because of this situation, and because this is something that no one was prepared for in traditional schools. And so I feel like that is kind of the way that I am, where I was like, I could do a good job at this. And so I kind of feel like I have to at least give it a try. And if I feel like I'm the best person for the job, I feel like I have to do it. And like I said, it is work that I enjoy. So as much as I do miss teaching, I have enjoyed this job as well.
Well, you're fulfilling a big need. Colleen Cook is on Facebook, and a while back she said, you know, she can't imagine, you know, it's such a huge undertaking, testing for any school, but particularly in the online model, because, you know, we have teachers all over the state. Students have to travel to their testing locations. It's a massive undertaking. So I'm not surprised that you saw the need and wanted to fill it, because that's the kind of person you've always been. But, you know, thank you for that. And if you're a parent out there or an educator, thank your testing coordinators, because they do hard work. And how frustrating to get to the end of the school year and see all those plans kind of fall apart. Like, I mean, did you just spend days calling locations and saying, we're not going to be there?
Yeah, I mean, I had a lot of calls, and it was frustrating to an extent, but I am definitely a person that likes to keep things in perspective. You know, as frustrating as it is to get to that point of the big testing session and have it all canceled, and, you know, the signups that I had made back in October were suddenly, you know, not needed anymore, and all of the work that I had done up to that point was not needed anymore. As frustrating as that was, I can also put it in perspective and say, I'm really lucky that we have a governor and a legislature that cancel testing, because if we had to do that and put all of our families at risk, that was just the wrong thing to do. And so my frustrations, I feel like, are minimal in comparison to what would have happened if we had kept schools open, what would have happened if we had required that all of our students attend testing. Because in the end, as important as testing is to the education world, your life is going to go on if you don't take a state test. And so it's just important to keep that in perspective, in my opinion.
Well, and I think for online families, testing's important because parents want to know how their children are doing, but we don't place all of our eggs in that basket. We really care more about, you know, the whole child and all of those things that go into their education. And we benefit as parents because we get to be daily participants in their education in a really special way. And we get to partner with you as educators in a way that, you know, that I didn't experience in the traditional setting. So testing's a huge undertaking, but it's just one piece of the work that you all do. Thinking about coronavirus, and things are starting to open up, but we know here in Colorado, most school districts right now are kind of juggling 3 plans. One might be kids returning full-time to the classroom. The other is some kind of, you know, full-time online they're going to offer to families. and then someplace in the middle, some kind of hybrid. What are you guys hearing on the ground there? What do you think? Is school going to start earlier? You know, what are you guys hearing so far?
Well, schools are definitely not going to start earlier. Ohio, our governor has been very proactive in terms of he shut everything down fairly early when you compare it to other states, especially in our area. So I don't think that there's definitely not a plan to open things early. I think that we're just going to have to see what the summer holds for us. We are just starting to open up now, and as we all know, there's like a 2-week window of when things happen or when somebody gets in contact with the coronavirus to when we start seeing the effects of that. There's like a 2-week window for that. So I think we'll have to see what that looks like. As far as what I know, the state testing side of things is a little bit conflicting because we have what's called the kindergarten readiness assessment that is given to all kindergartners. And that is still scheduled to be required before November 1st, which is interesting because we've always had KRA, the kindergarten test, and the 3rd grade testing in October to meet that November 1st deadline for the KRA. However, 3rd grade testing, as part of the law that they passed to cancel state testing for the spring, 3rd grade testing, it said in that law, could not be held before November. So KRA is still scheduled to happen before November, and 3rd grade testing is not allowed to happen before November, which is confusing and doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me personally. So as far as the requirements of the state of when we as an online school are required to be in person, that information is kind of conflicting. So, I mean, I don't know what the future is going to hold.
Hopefully ODE has some kind of like school reopening task force or committee, and
yeah, I'm sure they do.
Some online educators and parents on there that can help them remember that, you know, we need to know this information so that we can plan for our students. I hope that is happening in Ohio. I know it's happening in other states.
Yeah, I think the plan right now is to be back in schools regularly with, you know, things like hand sanitizer around. I don't think they're going to be able to enforce masks or social distancing in a traditional school because they just don't have the space for it. And in Ohio, we have not been able to require masks. And so, yeah, I think that the plan is to go back to school, but we'll see what happens over the summer. And hopefully we have more of more time to plan than we did in the spring. I know that was unexpected for everybody, and everybody had to make decisions within, it felt like a single week, everybody was making those decisions. But hopefully we have a little bit more warning before the fall if things do start to pick back up.
I hope so. I hope schools will be using the summer to figure out, you know, what their remote learning plans are going to be, and hopefully improve them for the benefit of students and teachers as well. We're coming up on the end of our time here, but what advice do you have for online students, particularly those new students that might be coming to us because there's so much uncertainty with this virus and what school's going to look like? What advice do you have for students?
That's a good question. I will say, and I mentioned this a little bit earlier about as far as like being accountable to yourself and being self-motivated. I find that that's a really big thing in online schools, as there's a lot of students that struggle with that when they come to an online school for the first time, because you don't have a teacher standing over you 24 or not 24/7, but, during school hours, telling you exactly what to do. And some students struggle without that very, very specific schedule. And so my advice is to learn how to be accountable to yourself, because we do have flexibility within our program that if you don't submit all of your lessons in a single day, there's no consequences for the following day, except that those lessons are still on your list to complete. And so learning how to be accountable to yourself and to make sure that you are staying on track because it is beneficial to you so that you don't have to do all of this work later, that is a huge thing. And it's something that you have to really learn quickly to be successful in an online environment. And it's just a great skill to know as a human being. Definitely something that I've benefited from.
It'll save you some heartache down the line when you have 20 lessons to complete.
Yeah, don't wait until your deadlines.
No.
Just don't do it. It's not good for anybody.
Yeah, you want to go do something fun, and then your mom is saying, yeah, that's not going to happen until all these lessons are done. So yeah. That's great advice. Now put your teacher educator hat on. If parents are thinking about doing full-time online by choice, not being forced into it because of the pandemic, but maybe they've had a taste of it during this crisis and have decided, you know what, this might be an option for my student. They thrived being at home and we can make it work. What advice do you have to parents who might be exploring online and thinking about enrolling for the fall? What do they need to think about and what should they be doing now?
Well, right now, I would definitely be doing your research on different schools. I'm obviously biased for Ohio Connections Academy in Ohio. I absolutely feel like it's the best online school in Ohio and probably in other states, but I don't have experience in other states, so I'll just say for Ohio.
I'm going to say we're biased, but yes.
Yeah. So definitely do your research on the schools and think about, everybody's home life is a little bit different right now. So there's a lot of people that may be working from home right now that are able to help their students a little bit more. But you do have to think about if you are in a situation where you're working from home right now, but you might not be in December, then what is that going to look like for your family? And is your student still going to be able to participate in an online school? Because it's not beneficial to start them in something if you can't follow through with it. As much as it seems like, this is a better option because you have all the resources, you have all of these teachers with experience. If it's something that if your home situation changes and then they don't have the support at home, you don't want to put your students in a position where you're kind of pulling the rug out from under them and everything changes all of a sudden and then they don't have the support that they need to be successful in our school. So think about, and again, it's hard to predict the future, so you may not even know what's going to be happening in December, but definitely try to make sure that there is somebody that is going to be talking with your student every single day about their school, what they accomplished that day, what they learned, keeping track of their lessons, making sure that they're on track with that. If you're in Ohio or another school that has attendance laws, make sure that they're on track with their attendance. So make sure that there is an adult that is checking in on their education every single day. Because our teachers are wonderful and they will reach out to your student as soon as they notice that something is wrong, but you're going to notice it within a day, whereas we might notice it within a week. And you can, problems can pile up within a week, and you want to make sure that those are being addressed right away.
Yeah, our goal is continuity in education and, successfully getting through every day as online students and teachers. Well, Anna Ridenour, I want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. If you have any questions about Ohio Connections Academy or online learning in general from a student and a teacher perspective, please leave your comments on Facebook here in the thread, and we'll be sure to get back with you. I so appreciate you being here, and I'm so proud of you. Another question, one last question. Are there any more teachers at Ohio Connections Academy that were online students as well?
Yeah, we do actually have one other teacher. Her name is Danielle Carone. Actually, she got married. I'm not sure what her new last name is anymore, but we do have one other student that came back as a teacher who was also a math teacher. She teaches middle school math. I taught high school. But yes, and as far as I know, I think that we are the only two in the country, as far as I know, and we both happen to be in the same school.
I think in some other schools there might be a couple more, but
yeah,
definitely an elite club and an elite group
we might have been the first two
of students that went through your education in the online setting and then came back to be educators in the online setting, which I think is special and a testament to the work your teachers did, and then obviously just the awesome individuals that you are, that you came back to serve your fellow students. So thank you for all the work that you do and making us proud every day. We appreciate that so much. And we will be back here for the parent exchange next Tuesday. Colleen will be here with her guests. And again, thank you all for tuning in. And Anna, thanks again. And we will see you guys all next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you.